youth. Welcome, Jamie. Allow me to invite all the panelists joining Jamie. Ms. Natasha Benka, who is the Deputy Head of Division, Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, Germany, to join. I'd like to invite Mr. Norbert Mumba, who is the Deputy Executive Director of AFI. Alongside them is Mr. Olivier Kayumba, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry in charge of Emergency Management, MINEMA, Rwanda. And finally, I would like to invite Mr. Christopher Harrao, the Vice President of Global Public Policy MasterCard.
Okay, is this on? All right, great. Okay, it looks like people are still trickling in, but let's go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. For those of you in the room with us now, thank you for sticking with us until the very last panel of the last day of the conference. I think that deserves its own congratulations. So to keep your energy up for this very last panel, we are going to be doing some of that live polling that you participated in the previous panel, so warning in advance to have your phones out and ready to go with the AFI GPF app up. Okay, so we are here today to talk about the global crisis of forced displacement and the role of financial services in responding to that crisis and in building resiliency. Forced displacement is undoubtedly one of the biggest global crises of our time, and something that both global bodies and national policymakers are grappling with today. So I wanted to share a few statistics for everybody, something I love to do, but just to give some context of what is happening with forced displacement around the globe today. So as of June 2019, forcibly displaced persons, we might be referring to them as FDPs throughout the panel, worldwide has increased to 70.8 million people from 68.5 million just 1 year ago. This is the highest level that we have seen in 70 years, and that's the 70 years we've been tracking this so closely. These numbers are expected to continue to rise. We're trending up, and we don't see them going down anytime soon. Altogether, 9 of the top 10 refugee hosting countries are in developing regions, and 84% of refugees live in these countries. Now, by 2030, we expect that 60% of the world's extreme poor are going to be living in fragile and conflict-affected situations. And out of the 31.5 million people for whom we have age disaggregated data, people who are FDPs, 16.3 million, or just over 50%, are under the age of 18. So for the panel today, financially including the invisible and how to economically empower forcibly displaced youth, this becomes a pretty critical thing when we look at the percentage of FDPs that are youth today. And that's just under 18, so if we were to look at up to 24, we would be looking at probably a significant majority of who's forcibly displaced. So the scale of the crisis is really an impediment to progress. And is going to make it really difficult to achieve the goal that's been mentioned many times in the last couple days of leaving no one behind. We really need to find some development solutions, and financial inclusion may be one of them. I think that there is a growing appreciation for how financial exclusion of FDPs can stifle social and economic development in the countries that are affected by these crises, but it's a pretty complex challenge to fix. One that's going to take collaboration among a lot of different stakeholders, both development and humanitarian actors, government agencies, and the private sector. And luckily now we have with us a panel, a cross-section of all of those sectors here, and I'll introduce the panelists again because I think they were introduced as people were still trickling in, so I want to make sure everyone knows who we're talking to today. So immediately to my left is Ms. Natasha Banker. She's the Deputy Head of Division for the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany, BMZ. Mr. Norbert Mumba, who everyone knows, Deputy Executive Director of AFI. Mr. Olivier Kayumba, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry in charge of Emergency Management, MINEMA, here in Rwanda. And Mr. Christopher Harrell, the Vice President for Global Public Policy at MasterCard. So my understanding is that this is the first time that we've ever discussed the issue of financial inclusion of FDPs on the AFI stage here at the GPF. So I want to thank AFI and its members for putting this so squarely on this year's agenda. And because this is our first time discussing FDPs at this forum, I think that we are all quite curious to actually know more about your views and perspectives on forcible displacement. And so we're going to start with our very first poll. So if you could please get out your phones and open up your AFI GPF app and go to the polling questions. Actually, and I wanted to, and we could pull up maybe the first polling question, please. It's actually on your app, this polling question number 2. We had a little bit of a flip in the app itself, and so when you go to your polling questions, please choose question number 2. It's the one you'll see listed here as polling question number 1. But just make sure that what you're reading on your screen matches what you see behind me right now. And apologies for the confusion, if any. So the question that we are asking is about why financial inclusion of FDP youth is important. So choose one answer, please. Financial inclusion of FDPs is most important because it helps link them to the formal economy, because it helps to link them to ways to build livelihoods, because it allows access to cash transfer and remittances, because it allows us to make the invisible visible, to kind of see bringing them into a formal economic situation so we are able to include them, and finally, resiliency to future shocks. And if you're just coming in, you have to really quickly open up your app and answer this question, so everybody get ready. We want everybody's answers. So select your choice, please. Maybe. Is it going to show? Oh. 1 second. Lots of anticipation there for the answers. All right. Okay, thank you all so much. And please keep your answers coming in. We'll leave this up for a little while. But I think it's quite interesting to see that there's a bit of a balance across the first 3, and with access to cash transfers and remittances coming in as perhaps the most important reason, but we're still shifting. But I want to take a moment because I'm going to ask my panelists to respond to these. So I'm going to start with you, Natasha. So BMZ and you in particular, in the time that I've known you, have been quite a champion of this topic of financial inclusion of FDPs. You spearheaded the creation of the GPF policy paper on financial inclusion of FDPs, priorities for G20 action when Germany held the presidency of the G20, and more recently spearheaded the roadmap for sustainable and responsible financial inclusion of FDPs. I would love to get your reactions to the responses to this first polling question. Can you tell us, in your reaction to this, a little bit more about why BMZ feels that this is important work to do, and whether these answers gel with your position or if you have some other views?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jamie. And I also would like to thank AFI for putting this topic here in the plenary for the first time. I think it has been discussed in breakout sessions at GPF before, but it's the first time that we're actually sitting here in the plenary, and I think this is great. Yeah, I'm not so surprised by this result, I must say. So when I've been faced with the question, I couldn't really decide which of the first three I would pick. I then thought, okay, it's the link to livelihoods, because I think it will be important for forcibly displaced persons in general, but youth in particular, to rebuild their livelihoods when they arrive in their host community, host country, or the displaced environment if they're still within their own country. And also the access to cash transfers and remittances is of course very important to link to family and friends who might not be with them but might be somewhere afar, but if they have the possibility to receive cash from them, I think this is good. Yeah, you were asking why BMZ was engaging or is still working on the topic. I think in your introduction you kind of gave the answer already, because I think 70 million people, that's actually a very high, sadly very high and impressive number, and it's continuously rising over the years, and that shows that forced displacement continues to be a problem for the years to come, and it's affecting developing and industrial nations alike, and even more developing nations. When you look at the refugees, you were mentioning 85% of refugees are actually living in developing countries. So this is why we as a ministry working on development cooperation think the topic of forced displacement as such is very important for us to work on. It's one of our priorities. And so the strategy of BMZ when it comes to forced displacement is called, when you translate it, like create perspectives or open up prospects for forcibly displaced persons. We want to stabilize host communities, or host regions, and also support forcibly displaced persons, increase the economic opportunities. And I think financial inclusion contributes to these goals, as we have seen and discussed in various fora during the last few years. And this also has been recognized by the United Nations in the Global Compact on Refugees recently, where the access to financial services is mentioned as an important means to enhance the self-reliance of refugees under the chapter on jobs and livelihoods, actually. So we're coming back to the livelihoods here. We are actually quite happy that this has been recognized also in the United Nations by the community who is dealing with forced displacement, because what we have seen is that very often there are two worlds, more or less. There are the people who are working on forced displacement, and there is the financial sector crowd. And what we tried to work on was to bring those two communities together. Maybe I'll leave it here for now.
Great, thank you, Natasha. I would like to shift over to Olivier. I'm really curious also about your reactions to the polling question, and to hear more about kind of the objectives of the Rwandan ministry in charge of emergency management had when it launched the joint strategy with UNHCR on the economic inclusion of refugees. Natasha mentioned stabilizing livelihoods, economic opportunity, and self-reliance. Are these similar goals to what you have? Is something different? Can you tell us more about the program that you've launched here?
Thank you, Jenny. It's an honor for us to be here on this panel among these people, the banks and the inclusion of the disadvantaged people. I think they talked about it during lunchtime when we were having together that lunch. The ministry developed this strategy for inclusion, having in mind that all the environment was set to have the young people or the refugee in general, they have already access to this financial system because they have their IDs and they can have They are registering their phone numbers for mobile money transfer. They have a bank account, and they can have savings. So that environment was there already, and the UNHCR having a budget constraint, they wanted to have these people in the camps or in urban areas trying to have their life being, to be self-reliant because of lack of budget, as I was saying. So it is a strategy that was developed to make sure that with the environment they have, they can go ahead and be self-reliant. So that was the main objective.
Okay, thank you. It's great to hear about initiatives like that, because a lot of times what I hear about the way that the policies are put in place or the type of environment for inclusion, economic or financial inclusion of refugees is actually quite limited, and it's very challenging to be able to provide the environment for the inclusion. So I would like to actually, on that note, shift to the second polling question, so please get your phones back out again. And I want to ask about your views on, from where you sit, whatever, if you're a regulator or what other, in another sector, what you see as the main challenge of financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons or youth in particular. Is it a matter of politics, of policy, and that includes regulation, of law, of money, of whether it's resources, budget, or kind of money that the forcibly displaced person actually has, or is it a matter of infrastructure, that there's actually not the physical infrastructure in place to make it possible to provide financial services to these populations? So if you could please put in your answers. This should be polling question number 1 on your app. I'll just give it a couple more seconds. Perhaps not so surprising, since we do have many policymakers and regulators in the room, that they might choose that. But I want to actually, I think, appropriately shift to you, Norbert, to ask your perspective. I'd love to get your reaction to this, and also note the leading role that you have played in working with both BMZ and GPFI and with AFI members to both understand better and raise awareness of the challenges from a regulatory perspective of promoting financial inclusion of FDPs. So AFI, I know, released a special report on financial inclusion of FDPs, perspectives of financial regulators. So love to get your reactions here, but also if you could please share with us some of the challenges that you understand AFI members to face. And yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks, Natasha. Sorry, Jamie.
I also have a German last name, so it's fine.
I think, allow me to take a back step a bit, and then maybe we can create more momentum and move forward. I think the key question that we should be asking ourselves when we tackle this topic is that what are the imperatives? What are the policy or economic or public policy imperatives that challenge us, that drive us to try and address this specific question? I think the first imperative is that this population is actually significant. You know, the population of forcibly displaced persons, we are talking about 70 million, which we can break down into refugees, internally displaced persons, and so forth. So that's absolutely key. And then the second imperative is that this is mostly comprising women and youth and children who are forcibly displaced for different reasons. Then the third imperative, and this is coming very close to the results of the first question in the poll, which I think they brought in linking to the economy at 22, linking to livelihoods at 28%, and also access to transfers and remittances, which was sitting at around 36% of the people here. So it makes the case for policy intervention. Then also when it comes to the latest poll, which is looking at 22% as politics and 53% as policy, the two politics and policy being very closely linked to each other actually also gives us the reason to start designing strategies and policies. Now, when you put the aggregate of the two together, you try to match it to what really are the issues around the percentages that we see on the two questions that were set up. Of course, the politics is how do you treat forcibly displaced persons? Do you put them in one little corner of the country and then condemn them to fate, or do you start to address them? And this is where, like you alluded to, AFI in August did produce a report on financial inclusion for forcibly displaced persons with specific reference to the role of regulators. I think they are key here, and we can pick up examples. If you pick Jordan, for instance, one of the key things that they've addressed is the issue of identity. And again, linking it to the topic, they've managed to successfully link technology to resolve one problem, which was of identity, through the use of biometrics, which is sort of like refutable. But in bridging this, they've now linked it to the platform economy, where previously maybe you would carry sacks of rice, mealie meal, or whatever to give to refugees, but with that linkage now, the refugees can link up to commerce, shops and so forth, and go and pick things. There are other countries, I know for Zambia, there was a regulation that was issued that now allows these people to open bank accounts. But why is this key? I think that's the question that we should ask. If you look at the statistics, where the issue of almost 50% are under the age of 18, the question we should be asking ourselves is that when they transition into these countries that offer them refuge, they are staying in those countries for an average of up to 10 years. Now, how then do we make sure that they are not left behind, as the statement goes? We can only make sure that they are not left behind, because a 10-year gap is going to be extremely significant for one to sit outside the financial system. I think the prayer and the hope for even the countries that host these refugees is that one day they'll be able to return to their home countries to have meaningful life within their economies. So this is why it's key that those countries that offer them this temporary refuge should be able to allow them or provide for them to actively participate in the financial sector. Before I wind down, let's also look at how significant in the context of transfers and remittances these refugees, whichever way, contribute to their economies back home when they go into those countries that have accepted them to take part in limited commerce. There's a high level of remittances back to their home countries, which also forms a certain level of stability within the families that are not able to join them. On the last point, how do we then leverage technology to sort out our solutions? I think the key was you had issues of identity, because some of them may not have identity. We are seeing solutions coming out of there. You also have had issues of just policy to allow them to participate in the financial system. We are starting to see countries to reform their policies and allow this grouping to participate in the financial system. So in the totality of it, financial inclusion has different groupings. We are talking of women, we are talking of youth, we are talking of refugees. This is just one of the key components that we need to address if we are to make that drive to a holistic resolution of those who remain outside the financial system.
Thank you, Norbert, for that. And I'd love to come back to you later to learn a little bit more about some of the reforms that you're seeing from your members. But for now, I'd like to shift all the way down to Chris. Looking at the challenges of serving this population, MasterCard, the company, has been working in both in humanitarian and forcibly displaced environments for a really long time. And we understand that this is a challenging segment to serve, but MasterCard has been finding ways to do so. Could you tell us about the challenges that MasterCard faces, has faced, and how have you grappled with them? And any reaction you have to what you saw in the polling too.
Thank you, Jamie. So thanks to AFI for obviously inviting MasterCard to this forum. It's a great opportunity to obviously hear all your perspectives from the public sector. Just point of clarity, and Jamie's emphasized that I'm here on behalf of MasterCard Corporation, the commercial entity, and not the MasterCard Foundation, which is our independent philanthropic function. As far as the results of the poll go, I'm going to be a little bit controversial. I think as a private sector entity, we look at policy as enabling or disabling frameworks within a government or a nation that is addressing a particular issue and looking to either advance it or inhibit it. In the case of financially displaced persons, I think obviously the ideal is advancing their opportunity to participate in the formal economy and resume their lives. I think I was surprised to see politics kind of as far back as it was, although it was second, because if you think about sort of geopolitics and what that does in terms of incentivizing the private sector to actually participate and advance solutions that help enable things like financial inclusion, especially in areas of conflict where the needs are so great and the private sector can help. And so when you have outsized geopolitical risk and conflict, obviously you have a drawing down of investment, you have threats to risk appetite within certain institutions, and I think it really curtails private sector involvement in a way that preempts the ability to actually put in place solutions. So I think politics play a huge role right up front, that until that's addressed, you really can't quite get to the policy aspect of it. There's one more element to that, and then I'll get into the other part of the question. As a multinational global company based out of the U.S., a lot of what we see as it relates to our ability to advance digital payments solutions is this whole new manifestation of digital nationalism, and that resides in nations, markets turning inward, turning away from globalism, such that we're actually doing things it's called the islandization of standards, right? We're threatening things that would enable the deployment of digital financial solutions to the positive effect of segments like forcibly displaced persons. So we're actually undermining the infrastructure, the technology, the interoperability that exists to enable a lot of these solutions in creative ways. And so I think that in and of itself is a significant challenge that we face as a technology company as we start to see things like the bifurcation of the internet, the weaponization of data, different standards emerging in proprietary ways within markets, local data localization requirements. And so it becomes a very challenging environment for a tech company to function in, because you end up in a situation where you lose your ability to innovate and scale as well as you once could. So that's a challenge that I would sort of put at the macro level. As far as MasterCard in terms of what we do, I think you all probably have no problem understanding that, as a commercial entity, we have been and continue to, in the traditional sense, enable the disbursement and the transfer of funds through different transaction means. So as far as disbursements to different segments of the population, whether they're displaced forcibly or not, we have capabilities that are directly relevant to the humanitarian aid and have many humanitarian partners around the world. So we do this in three fairly familiar ways, I would hope, for everybody in the audience. We deploy in remote environments through the MasterCard Humanitarian Aid Network, which is really a digital voucher system. Right? It's a points-based system that is typically deployed in rural areas and doesn't rely on the transfer of cash or monetary value. We have what you would fully understand in terms of open-loop prepaid products that are very useful for distributing aid quickly. They have their own limitations, which I'll get into in a minute. And then we have the ability to, through many different solutions that MasterCard offers in partnership with the likes of mobile network operators and other technology enablers, the ability to basically send money anywhere, right? So we could send it to mobile wallets, bank accounts, ATMs, whatever the access channel may be or the mechanism that's in place and purpose fit for the need in the particular market. So getting to some of the challenges, I think some of them have already been raised. If we move beyond kind of the geopolitical or the macro level, as it relates to forcibly displaced persons, we as a company typically rely on things like a national identity. We are, with our banking partners, incredibly beholden to regulation around KYC, Know Your Customer. Those present, tremendous challenges in terms of financial institutions' willingness to partner and enter a market and offer solutions. There's regulations, many regulations in place that MasterCard and our partners and our customers have no interest in running afoul of, right? That's sort of a gating factor for us. So KYC is a big deal. I think the last mile in terms of access to digital goods and services, the channels that are provided, our ability to conquer the last mile is one of our biggest challenges. We can do everything in our power to put an excellent solution in place, but if the delivery mechanism over that last mile isn't there, then we're simply unable to have much effect. Those, what I would say, are kind of the top three in terms of the challenges that we face as an organization, as well as operating in what is an increasingly challenging political environment.
Okay, so you're basically saying all of the above.
Yes.
All right, I got it. Okay, so politics, policy, infrastructure, it sounds pretty daunting. And then I think we add in the additional layer of the challenge of youth populations. I want us to shift into a conversation around that and what measures we feel like are needed in order to ensure that forcibly displaced youth are able to access financial services and decent jobs, become empowered and engaged. Perhaps not at 12, but as they move into adulthood, we could discuss that. And I think I'd like to just keep going with you, Chris. I think maybe an easy question, maybe not. But for MasterCard, has MasterCard considered the youth segment explicitly when you've partnered on FDP FDP types or humanitarian situations, or have you been asked to by your partners that are serving those populations? If so, can you share about that? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so very challenging area for us as a company. If you're at all familiar with sort of the issuance of payment credentials in the form of a credit card, typically in most jurisdictions, probably if not all, the requirement is that you have achieved adulthood, right, to be able to manage financial products. That's no different in this particular circumstance as it relates to humanitarian aid. That said, when we work with our partners who are focused on this issue, we always take into account the plight of children and families. As Norbert pointed out, typically most vulnerable populations, they come with outsized risk in terms of the potential for abuse or being taken advantage of. As you think about enabling these types of solutions, it tends to draw attention to a particular segment within a population that you're enabling. And those vulnerabilities and those risks that might exist with that segment come to the fore. And so we have to be incredibly conscientious about that. I mentioned it already previously. Another challenge is the idea of ID, right? Most children, youth haven't established an ID. They don't have a formal financial background. They probably do not have sort of a digital footprint that is terribly identifiable in terms of distinct. And so without that, we have challenges in getting directly to them. To resolve that, we look for creative partners in the field that allow us to access them and provide them with the digital services and in some cases funding to carry on, right? If they've been displaced, we look for creative ways to actually bring them into the fold and provide them with these services. MasterCard, one of the things that we do very well is authentication, right? We've been doing it for many, many years. If you think of the unique identifier of the credit card number, that can be viewed as a functional ID. If it's affiliated with a name, a person, a credit card number, an account number is a functional ID. Those are two things we do very well, authenticating and establishing a unique ID. The other thing we look to do is partner in unique ways, right? We do a lot in the area of biometrics as far as authentication goes. We're looking at interesting things like babies' footprints are actually unique very soon after they're born, unlike fingerprints, which actually don't come in until 2 or 3 years in terms of being a reliable source. So we have to look at this area of youth very carefully. I don't think it's something that, as a company, we have been long-term equipped to deal with, simply because that wasn't our target customer for so long, right? So we have to be more creative, we have to be more risk-aware, and we have to find the right kinds of partners who can handle some of the things like identification, registration, such that we can work with them more effectively.
Okay, thank you. And I think I'd like to shift to you, Norbert, because I think a lot of what Chris is describing as some of the challenges are things that regulators could potentially do more to address and to help fix. I'm curious about, you spoke about some of the challenges that regulators face in serving FDPs in general, or creating an enabling environment to do so. Could you say a little bit more about what the regulators are facing in terms of how they could be providing an enabling environment for a company like MasterCard to do their work? And on top of that, give us also some insight to how your members are considering youth and what they're looking at right now.
Yeah, as I indicated earlier, and also you alluded to it, there's quite some work that has been done both by AFI and also collaborating with the G20 through the GPFI. And also the G20 itself developed some principles on forcibly displaced persons. I think some of the key, if I may pick some from the G20 principles, some of the key interventions that need to be made is just the recognition that this group of people needs to be prioritized for access to financial services. We have alluded on this panel to the fact relating to KYC. How, with improvements in technology, can we mitigate the level of risk that has been attached to this particular grouping by ensuring that the issues that surround technology and due diligence are addressed. Biometrics now, I think, in terms of the real or true identity of the individual, have gone a long way to resolve this. It is more a policy shift that is required from members. We see Governor Egypt is here. They've made strides in trying to accommodate this grouping. I alluded to Jordan. Also, there are positive moves within Uganda in terms of refugee concentration. But I think the key to real policy interventions is to open up the banking sector. Most of the countries are restricted to admit, rather most of the financial service providers in our member countries are restricted to provide financial services to this group of people, particularly youth, because the regulatory environment simply doesn't allow these private sector players to open a bank account. So the first shift there is for the regulators, having assessed the risk that is in there, to open up for this grouping of people. And also, from talking about politics, from a purely political angle, I would also urge that we avoid to ascribe more than the level of risk that these groupings pose. Sometimes they've been put in one bucket and described as being extremely risky, and yet they don't carry that much risk. So we have to treat them like all other people. So in terms of policy interventions, it's really mostly about legal reform. It's also about linking them and allowing them to participate in a way within the economies that they go to settle in, until that opportunity comes for them to go back to settle in their home countries. That's basically how I would see it. But I think reference to the G20 work on the principles, reference to AFI's own report on the inclusion of forcefully displaced persons with a regulator perspective would help to drive the process forward. And of course, leveraging, more importantly, the private sector who are developing these innovations that will assist us to solve some of the policy challenges that we face is also going to be absolutely key.
All right, thank you. So you mentioned, Norbert, proactively prioritizing enabling access. And so I want to shift to you, Olivier, because I feel like this is exactly what Rwanda has done. And I would love for you to tell us about the types of projects that Minema has taken forward to financially include FDPs, in particular youth, if you have some examples there.
Thank you, Jimmy. I would like, as you say, to point out that the government of Rwanda has made at least the access to financial services equal to everyone on the Rwandan territory. And the constraint the youth we are having in these forcibly displaced people, the same constraint they have is the one the nationals have. The issue of guarantees, the policies in banking, the risks that the bank do not want to take, whether you're a refugee or not. Since you don't have a guarantee, the issues are the same. But for these people who are more vulnerable than the nationals, at least, we have thought with other partners to give them more capacity to face these constraints. And we have at least, as of today, we have 4 programs that we have developed together with other companies and other institutions. We have a program entitled Refugee Livelihood Program, which is implemented by a company which is named Inhomoko here in Rwanda. We have Access to Finance Rwanda, which is also developing a project, financial inclusion of refugees and host communities. And we have a new project that we are embarking on with the funding of World Bank, which is named Economic Inclusion Program for Refugees, for refugee women. That would be the other one. But I'm talking about a Refugee Inclusion Program for Women, which is implemented by Indigo. And we have a new one that I'm talking about with the World Bank, which is Socioeconomic Inclusion of Refugees and Host Community. We have also other activities that we have been taking on with, in partnership with the Ministry of Youth. We have the Youth Connect Entrepreneurship competition in 2019, and we had at least 90 best business among the young refugees that have been considered and being awarded. So I think those are the main program I'm talking about today by the government of Rwanda and other partners.
Okay, wonderful. So kind of looking into the types of programming that a ministry could do, the types of proactive next steps that could be taken, I'd like to shift to you, Natasha, and kind of shift us kind of also into thinking about what kind of actionable next steps could be taken and who should and could be doing what. And so I'd like to come back to the roadmap that has been created and the action agenda that's been put into place by BMZ and the G20 along with AFI's input. So could you tell us a little bit more about the roadmap, what it suggests, how you envision it being implemented, and where youth might fit into it?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Maybe I step back before I do that, because you were mentioning already the work we were doing under the German G20 presidency. So we were actually drafting and publishing a policy paper that was written together with many stakeholders like AFI, G20 countries, non-G20 countries, private actors, academia, international organizations. And this policy paper addressed mainly the question, why is the access to financial services, financial inclusion important for forcibly displaced persons? What are the challenges? We have heard some of the challenges already here on the panel. And what are the priority action areas, mainly for the G20, but also beyond. So the main findings was we have to increase dialogue and cooperation, also data and evidence, which I think is also quite important when we look at youth and forcibly displaced persons. I think there's not that much data out there, to be honest. And also to work on inclusive policy frameworks. So the next step after we had this policy paper kind of setting the frame, was that we were tasked by the G20 finance ministers to work on a roadmap. So that is the roadmap you were mentioning. And the main objective of this roadmap is or will be to catalyze actions by offering a comprehensive set of voluntary recommendations for each stakeholder group involved in the financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons. So this includes governments, regulators and supervisors, as well as humanitarian organizations, private sector donors, and international organizations, and also the academia. The roadmap focuses on 6 identified cluster areas that are mainly responding to the challenges that were identified, which is national strategies and regulation, resiliency of financial infrastructure, of course also customer identification, what has been mentioned, and related international standards, financial consumer and data protection, and also financial literacy, bridging the the gap between humanitarian aid and development interventions, and also economic participation, as has been mentioned, that financial inclusion does also help to economically include forcibly displaced persons in their host communities so that they can actually contribute to their host communities. We hope that the roadmap will provide a guidance for all the relevant stakeholders involved. So there's a quite comprehensive set of actions for each and every stakeholder group, and of course there needs to be a cooperation between the stakeholder group. The roadmap is yet to be published, so we are still reaching out to all the organizations who supported us in drafting it, and even beyond, to kind of endorse the roadmap for publication, so that it can also be used by everybody in the room who wants to work on the topic. And you were, I've not forgotten, asking me about the link to youth. Actually, there's only a very small paragraph referencing to the target group of youth and also women, stating that this group is particularly important because it's particularly underserved and affected by displacement. But what we did in our work is that we were focusing on the common challenges, because of course the group of forcibly displaced persons is a very diverse and heterogeneous group. So we could not identify actions for each and every possible segment. So we were facing on the common challenges and priority actions. And then, of course, everybody working on it needs to adapt to the specific context and also looking into the specific target groups. And I really believe that youth and also women are very important to be looked at. I'm not a regulator or supervisor, but I would assume that the interventions one is thinking of when you target youth in general and financial inclusion do not so much differ for youth and forced displacement when you kind of add the layer of forced displacement. So if you find the intersection, I believe there could be solutions and interventions out there. Yeah, you were also asking about the implementation. So as I said, the roadmap is there. We hope it will provide guidance to many international and also national actors in addressing the topic, and we really aim to encourage the political will and also the policy leadership on the topic. So we as German government and development ministry, we have started with the implementation already, and would like to bring the roadmap into action. One activity we are undertaking is to help to close the knowledge gap through funding a quite big research project carried out by Tufts University, a German university, and the international rescue community to better understand the financial needs of refugees, including these of the young people, and how these needs are met or not met by existing financial services, and also where there is need for better support. And the findings are supposed to directly feed into the interventions of key partners in the two focus countries we are doing the research, which is Jordan and Kenya. We are also working with our bilateral cooperation on the topic. For example, in Jordan, it has been mentioned, GIZ is supporting the access to mobile wallets for refugees, and also the Sparkassenstiftung. I don't really know how to translate it. Sparkassen, kind of a German banks. Yeah, okay. They're working with financial service providers in Armenia and Ghana, mainly on financial literacy for the financial service providers and also the clients when it comes to forced displacement. And last but not least, I have to mention the very good cooperation we have with AFI on the topic. We are funding project that AFI is now undertaking, and Norbert has been referring to it, to advance financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons, putting policy recommendations to practice. So for now, this project is focusing on Rwanda, Mauritania, and Afghanistan, but we hope that other countries might join, and that this project will promote fruitful peer exchange, create good practices, and can then also be transferred to other regions and members. But I'm sure you can even elaborate more on what the project is about.
Great. That's exactly what I would like Norbert to do, is to elaborate. So just in thinking about bringing the roadmap into action, and what was in the roadmap is so much of it is anchored in things that are in the jurisdiction of regulators, and with national regulations, consumer protection, enabling links to ID. And so moving that forward, Norbert, what is AFI going to do? Can you tell us more about that project and how AFI is going to be working with its members to take this forward?
I think we're at a stage now where we sort of like throw it to the members after a certain body of evidence in terms of what different countries have done to intervene to be able to facilitate refugees. We now really like throw it to the members to see their own in-country specific policy changes that they can make to be able to facilitate this. I think the challenge in the early days was, even with if you look at the standard setting bodies, issues relating to a risk-based approach to diligence were not very pronounced. Now, even the standard setting bodies recognize that if this grouping or certain individuals within the grouping are not of that level of risk, there could be a more simplified diligence. But at national level, I think the way forward also is to ensure that you have a cross-agency cooperating mechanism which will be able to facilitate this access. I see, for instance, that we talk of identity challenges from refugees, but we are also aware that the majority of these are registered by the United Nations Refugee Agency, for instance, and they are given a form of identity card. And these identities are actually issued by national agencies in different countries that take care of refugees. Why, for instance, is this identity not acceptable to the financial sector within our national jurisdictions and so forth? We also see, in terms of cross-coordination of agencies, that the UN agency responsible for refugees, for instance, would be developing programs for these people to integrate within communities. Because, again, it is not access to finance for no purpose. What is the end of, what is the purpose for enabling them to access finance? It's really for them to develop economic well-being and also to start to become integral parts of the economic process of within the communities that they serve. There's also a business case to this. If you put them in an area, you don't allow them to integrate for economic purposes, you have to keep mobilizing resources to support them because they are not generating any economic activity. So as we talk of including this particular segment within our societies, I think we should also address the business case for this. There's a clear business case to get them to be on their own, having addressed the risks of the so-called perceived risks that we see out of them. Going forward also, one would like to see more formalized processes in terms of how the component of KYC is going to be handled regarding this. a more permanent arrangement within countries of how customer due diligence for forced displaced persons is going to be handled. On our part, we've moved over to emphasizing in-country implementation support. So the members that are ready to actually pick up such policy interventions within their national jurisdictions to enable more people, particularly this segment, to come to the thing. We, working also with our partners, would be ready and willing to provide this support. So if
Great.
you say the way forward, that's the way forward.
Okay, thank you, Norbert. And I want to make sure we have time for some questions. Can I see a show of hands how many people have questions? I see a few. So while you're thinking about what your questions may be, I want to shift down to Chris. So we have a roadmap. There's a lot to be done. In the meantime, you're out there serving this population. Can you tell us about kind of the any new partnerships, products, or services that you'd like to highlight that you're finding effective while we're working towards the vision of where we want this to go? And then we'll shift into questions. No, yeah, I don't think so.
There we go. I'm back.
There we go.
So sure, I think as I mentioned earlier, obviously we have a number of traditional plays in markets all around Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and these tend to take the form of partnerships with mobile network operators. We have a couple of programs that I'm aware of here in Rwanda. I don't work directly on them, but my colleagues do. Things that both address incoming refugees from other countries, as well as refugees returning to Rwanda, in terms of setting them up with prepaid cards that have funding agencies funding them. We've enabled, I think, multi-wallet solutions where multiple agencies can fund an individual account of a displaced person. Partners with mobile network operators to give a SIM card, a mobile phone, and the ability to transfer money or receive money over that mobile phone. So partnerships like that. I think to really address the need and the changing need, and I think, Norbert, you touched on some of this in terms of, and we talked about this at lunch, is this idea that you can put forcibly displaced people in a place and not really integrate them or allow them to sort of establish a digital identity, a financial history, enter the formal economy in a realistic way. And that's sort of a temporary salve, right? It's something that I think grows in terms of the difficulty with which you might be able to deal with that situation. And so as we see the duration stretch out in terms of the time that people are spending as forcibly displaced persons, perhaps in a refugee camp, and we're also seeing them grow in size, they essentially have become cities unto themselves that you would argue would require the same services, whether they're digital, the same goods that would underpin kind of the regular commerce of a regularly functioning city. You have people who come into these places and they sort of go through a spectrum of being probably an impoverished new arrival to kind of then an intermediate participant within this location, and then hopefully economically active in the local community, establishing relationships, receiving money from abroad, participating in the local economy, supporting the local economy, and integrating in a way that's meaningful and contributes to the local economy. Some of the things that we're looking to do is move beyond simply the transfer of funds, right, between accounts or just disbursement of aid, right? So somebody gets a prepaid card with some aid value on it and is able to buy food. What we're really looking to do through our partnerships, because MasterCard approaches this as the shared value model, right? Our mantra is do well by doing good, set up commercially sustainable and operationally sustainable programs, but we can't do it alone, right? We look at the asset set that we have and the technology capabilities that we have, and we need to set up the right kind of partnerships. And I think a good example of that is, we have what's called the Smart Communities Coalition, which we've done in partnership with USAID, which is really about changing kind of how refugee settlements operate, right? Changing the operating model. And this is all around what type of connectivity is enabled there, what's the energy requirement in terms of electricity and services that rely on that, what are the digital tools that are available, how are we using and managing data within these communities. And so now this is forward thinking, but it's through efforts like this that we're going to move beyond just taking a role as a funding company in partnership to more of a let's evolve sort of the social and economic attributes of places that are sort of holding financially displaced people. And really, I'll finish with, there's 4 objectives to this program, and I'll read them because I don't want to get them wrong. But one is to increase efficiencies in camp management and the services that are being delivered. So that's at the rudimentary level, I would say. Empower refugees to provide for themselves and their families, give them that access to that livelihood that was mentioned in the first poll. Equitably address the needs of host community members in and around these targeted settlements, so it's that integration into the community. And then improve the stability in conflict-affected regions, right? And that through things like integration and social programs and the like. So that's some of what we're looking to do, is to extend beyond simply being a transaction enabler and actually integrate into other services and use our capabilities to enable things like access to health care, access to financial literacy programs, and other things that I think are going to help integrate people that have found themselves in this situation.
Great, thank you, Chris. Okay, so ready for questions. We don't have a ton of time. I think we'll take maybe 3. I see one. I'm sure there's more than one. But let's start with the first one, and maybe it'll inspire more. If you could please introduce yourself and just keep your question as brief as possible so we can allow enough time for others.
Okay, thank you very much. The panelists, Honorable Momba. I have one question and one comment. My suggestion or comment is on the challenges that you mentioned here. I think one of the challenges is the awareness of the forcibly displaced persons, particularly the youth. In most of the areas, they don't have access to media and other stuff to get the news and to know about the financial institutions. You may also add one more challenge as awareness, because awareness is also important. I think we have forgotten to include internally displaced persons. We just talked about refugees. And countries like my country, Afghanistan, I'm Mateen from Afghanistan, by the way, I'm sorry. And in Afghanistan, we have a lot of internally displaced persons. According to the UNHCR definition, forcibly displaced persons include refugees plus IDPs. So IDPs is also part of the forcibly displaced persons. One of the problems that this segment has is that they are moving so frequently. So one of the challenges that UNHCR and other stakeholders are facing is that they cannot capture their numbers and their locations because they are moving so fast. After the recovery, they go back to their home country, to the places that where they came from. This is because of the 2 reasons. One is the natural disaster.
Could you please ask your question?
Okay.
So we have thank you for your contribution. Just want to make sure we have enough time. Thank you.
2 reasons are there behind these movements. One is the natural disasters, which happens in areas like hurricane in Bahamas, just recently, and also because of the conflict. So now my question is, it's an open question from the panel. How the fintech and the RegTech can be leveraged to cover this segment of the society? Thank you.
Great, that's a really great question. Okay, any more questions before we ask the panel to respond to this? No other questions. All right, we have another. Come back with the mic. It's coming back.
from Afghanistan. In most of the cases in developing countries, the IDPs and refugees, they have no enough knowledge to use technology. In such cases, how can we address those people? Financial literacy is another problem. Sometimes someone who has no education, how will we address these people through technology when they don't have any education at all?
Thank you. Okay, so there's a question about the role of fintech and regtech, and then another about financial literacy. Who wants to intervene with what? Norbert, you want to go first?
Yeah. When I started off, I started off by saying that their numbers are around 70 million in terms of forcibly displaced persons, and out of this 70 million, almost half of it, somewhere around 40, are internally displaced person. I think there are two dimensions to your question. The challenges between the two may not be exactly identical. You know, the cross-border in terms of refugees and also those internally displaced. The internally displaced, the issue of identity may not be that pronounced because they are still within the identity systems of their national governments, but the externally displaced often are living without identity, and even if they have their identity, is this identity sufficient to allow them to access financial systems? But the latter part of your question is a yes. I mean, you can leverage technology to try and address some of these questions. We alluded to biometrics as one of the things that could help us on the KYC front. But yes, if I were to club it with the last question, which also talks of education for this grouping, and this is why I say the dynamics are different. For the internally displaced persons, yes, education is going to be absolutely key, and perhaps they'll still be falling within the same education interventions as the other people within their national jurisdictions, except with emphasis to that particular segment. But for the externally displaced persons, there are two steps. Have they been accepted in the society which has offered them refuge as a first step? And then the second step is, have they been accepted into the financial system before you even start to address issues relating to financial education for them? So that's how I would look at it.
Olivia, I'd love for you to also respond to the question about financial literacy and education. Are there examples concretely from the 4 programs that you mentioned here in Rwanda where you're directly looking at and intervening on those types of issues?
Yeah, thank you. I think, as Norbert has said, the financial literacy is key. And he mentioned, I think, also the financial capacity to access the financial services we have. I think what we intend as in Rwanda in our programs is to have these capacity building by all these companies I mentioned, Indigo, Inhomoko, and others. We have to get to push for these capacity building to allow them, because they are more vulnerable than the nationals, as I said, to allow them to go face these or to access these services. We need to push. Otherwise, if you leave it like that, these people psychologically they are going backward, and it's not good for their health.
Yeah, thank you. So we're coming to a close on the panel. I mean, I think what we wanted to cover today, and appreciating the panel for doing this so beautifully. So why financial inclusion of FDPs is so important, what are the barriers we're facing to their inclusion, and what we should be doing about it, can be doing about it, and a clear call for action, and a call to work together on a really complex challenge that does require cooperation and partnership across all of our sectors. And so as a very last word, 30 seconds each, if you're able to accommodate me there, where you could each of you go down the line and tell us what you feel like is concretely one more thing that you plan or could do from where you sit in your institution, and one thing that you would suggest from another person on the panel or someone from their sector to do that would help you achieve your objectives around financial inclusion of FDPs going forward. So ladies first, start with Natasha, and just 30 seconds each.
What I could do even more would be to reach out to my colleagues who are working on forced displacement and with the humanitarian actors like UNHCR, World Food Programme, and so on, to also take into account the topic of financial inclusion even more. We are already doing that, but I think there is a lot of room to do it more also in our own interventions. Looking at the panel, yeah. I can just maybe not do something completely new, but more continue what you're doing and share the good examples that you were presenting here, so that others can also start to work on the topic and realize that financial inclusion of forcibly displaced persons is important.
Okay. Thank you. Norbert, your 30 seconds, please. Go.
Yeah, obviously I would be appealing to the regulators and the policymakers to take a longer-term perspective on the impact of excluding a forcibly displaced person from the context that once you exclude them for periods of 10 years, they are being left behind. They will have catching up to do. So if we can quickly run to develop policies that will integrate them into our financial system to give them economic well-being, that would be my prayer.
Awesome. Olivier?
I think only one thing I can ask the policymakers and financial institutions is to take a risk, to accept and take a risk, as this is business, but take a risk and allow these people to access financial services. And you'll find that you're responding both to their need and to the economic situation of the country.
Thank you. Chris, final word?
Sure, and at the risk of currying favor with the moderator too late in the session, I would actually, I quote you, Jamie, something I saw you deliver at Fiji, where you said, you know, we need to be better than cash, we need to deliver more value than cash, and we need to link to other opportunities. And I think that's something that we at MasterCard are trying to do, be more than just a funding or a transfer mechanism, to actually create additional opportunities with our technology. And I would ask, you know, AFI and certainly Norbert as the panelist up here representing, that the channels remain open, that you guys have invited us to have these opportunities and engage with the regulatory people around the world, and that's invaluable to us, and hopefully we're providing value back to you in terms of sharing our experiences in the public-private dialogue. So that's what I would ask.
Thank you. So Natasha, Norbert, Olivier, Chris, thank you very much for your participation in the panel today, but also for your leadership, your passion, your collaboration, and all of your candor on a very complex but very important topic. I'd like to ask everyone to join me in thanking the panel, and that concludes our session.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and the panelists for this rich discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now concluded our plenary session and our breakouts are finished. So we would like to invite you to take a few minutes and go to the GPF app, where we would like you to fill the evaluation forms to give us an idea of what you have seen throughout these 2 days. And your feedback will be very helpful for the next GPF and beyond. just a few minutes for you to evaluate all the sessions and the breakouts and how the event was carried out. More directives are on the screens. In the interest of time, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for taking your time to complete the evaluation forms. But I would also like to inform you of the AFI Awards, which will be taking place from 7 tonight. And all members are welcome for the AFI Awards. The venue for the AFI Awards will be in MH1, MH2, and MH3. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to conclude our rich discussions and to conclude this wonderful power-packed meeting. With that said, I would like to invite Honorable John Rwangombwa, the Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda, to come to the stage. He will be accompanied by Mrs. Lobna Hela, the Deputy Governor, Central Bank of Egypt, on behalf of His Excellency Mr. Tariq Amer, the Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt, the Chair of the AFI Board, and Dr. Alfred Hanning, who is the Executive Director of AFI. Honorable John Rwangombwa will be giving us his closing remarks first. You're welcome.
Thank you, MC. Heads of institutions and representatives, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. As we come to the conclusion of the 2019 EGPF, allow me to thank you all for actively and constructively participating in the different discussions held throughout the week. It has been a great knowledge-sharing experience, and I hope we are all inspired and will aspire to deliver more on the financial inclusion journeys of our respective countries. I would also like to appreciate everyone's efforts in advocating for financial inclusion for all, and particularly the disadvantaged and the minority groups. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate the new members who made commitments under the Maya Declaration, and I hope that within the next few years, all members will have made their commitments. Let me also appreciate the great initiative by AFI of naming and awarding gender inclusion ambassadors. We are honored as the National Bank of Rwanda to be among the first cohort of these ambassadors. I assure you that gender inclusion remains top on our agenda as we strive to bring all Rwandans outside the financial exclusion. As we all know, financial inclusion is a win-win situation to providers and receivers. For providers, they benefit from increased clientele, which ultimately increases profitability, while for receivers, their wealth and welfare improves. Happy that financial institutions have continued to bring on the market innovative products that appeal to the needs of the financially underserved. Inspired by this year's theme, using technology for women, for inclusion of women and youth, technology such as mobile money has been a game changer in the emerging economies. It has and will continue to help financial service providers reach the mass unserved women and youth, regardless of their location, age, and other social characteristics. The Kigali Statement has come up with important recommendations which need to be implemented and in an effective and timely manner. Distinguished delegates, let me conclude my remarks by sincerely thanking everyone that played a role in making this 2019 GPF a success. Special thanks to the organizing committee led by AFI and BNR team. Without your dedication and commitment, this conference wouldn't have been a success. Our Master of Ceremonies, thank you for a job well done. I also want to thank the management and staff of the Kigali Convention Center, the translators, and all service providers that have greatly contributed to the success of this conference. It has been a very busy week, and I think many of you didn't get the opportunity to enjoy the many attractions Kigali has to offer. You are always welcome to come back as a private visitor, as a tourist, to enjoy the good things Rwanda has to offer. And as you know, Rwanda is among the top tourist destinations across the world. We have enjoyed hosting you, and I hope you enjoyed our hospitality. But time have come to say au revoir, goodbye. I wish you safe travels back to your capitals, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable John Rwangombwa. Let us receive Mrs. Lobna Helal, the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Egypt, to also give her closing remarks.
Your Excellency, Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda, esteemed members of the AFI Board of Directors, Dr. Hanning, Executive Director of the Alliance, Your Excellencies, Honorable Governors and Deputy Governors, fellow members of the AFI Network, AFI partners, ladies and gentlemen. What an insightful 2 days. To our host, the National Bank of Rwanda, thank you for having us in your beautiful country and for the great hospitality demonstrated by everyone throughout the forum. To AFI management, unit, and staff, thank you for once again exceeding our expectations and for the great efforts made to make this forum successful. Thank you for the audience, who look very tired now, so I think we owe ourselves a round of applause. AFI 11's annual GPF is now coming officially to an end, but I am positive that the work done over the past few days has given us another batch of knowledge, network connections, and learnings that will prove instrumental in further achieving our collective objectives. Whether the hard work of the working group members, the ever so engaging panels and breakout sessions, which addressed cross-cutting topics from financial inclusion, addressing the gender gap, innovative regulatory frameworks, and the importance of digitization in achieving our objectives, or the truly inspirational financial inclusion journey of Rwanda, of which I would really like to extend my congratulations and best wishes for getting your 100% full inclusion in the near future. Building on this momentum and in the spirit of the Kigali Statement, which represents our collective commitment to accelerate the achievements of our financial inclusion targets and leave no one behind, AFI continues to expand its horizon and challenge itself and its members to address critical issues and working better together, all of us together, to find appropriate solutions that can be adopted for implementation by various nations within the network. This GPF has also marked a number of firsts. The establishment of the first policy models by AFI working groups, the e-money and data core set policy models, the introduction of AFI gender ambassadors, and the first inclusive green finance working group meeting, and the announcement of AFI's new strategic partnerships. So it's another successful conclusion to the 11th GPF. To conclude, I would like to thank again our host, National Bank of Rwanda, for their warm hospitality, and I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank whoever country is going to be awarded the next GPF to host the event next year. I wish them the best of luck and looking forward to more and more successful GPF conclusions. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we draw close to the end of this ceremony, I would like to invite the AFI team to bring the gong back to the stage, where it started on the first day of this conference. Thank you. With that done, I would like to invite Dr. Alfred Hanning, the Executive Director of AFI, to give us his closing remarks. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Governor John Rangomwa, Deputy Governor Lopna Hilal, dear members and partners. Let me keep that part short. I would like to start off with an apology, Governor. This morning when I came up to inaugurate the ceremony for the ambassadors, I actually forgot to extend special appreciation for last night's event because it was a great gala dinner, and during that dinner I got the feeling, and I wanted to tell you that John Rangomwa is capable of many things, but he also can throw parties. That was for sure. Now, I also, well, I made an opening remark, and there were a couple of pictures, and I felt perhaps I owe you a few clarifications. No? Number one, the 29-year-old colleague who I mentioned, whose name is Ashton, he can also identify himself. He is in the room because if you want to talk to someone who thinks that the digital monopoly is not sophisticated enough, he is perhaps the person to talk to. So he's here, Ashton. Yeah? Thank you. Then the other picture you saw, the little girl. I mean, to be just clear, her name is Alma, and she's not my granddaughter, she's my daughter. No? Just wanted to make that. But I take from this the appreciation that apparently growing mature is also appreciated by some of you. So thank you very much for that. Now, let me just give you a few facts and figures. Highlights. Number one, I want to mention we had a total registered participants of 912. We had 456 registered members, out of which 192 were female and 264 were male. So that's still some work to do, but we are getting there. Numbers of institutions represented from the members is 69 and countries 59. Then the participation breakdown by region: from Africa 254, Pacific 28, Asia 62, Latin America 39, Eastern Europe 26, and MENA region 47. So this is the breakdown, just for your information. Well, yeah, it's over when it's over. So we are not there yet, and we haven't rung the gong. I mean, there will be another event tonight, and I would like maybe to share a little anecdote with you on that one, because when we came here on Monday, my office manager, Paula, who is also in charge of the award night, she was very sad because we couldn't have the award outside. There was a very nice venue, and apparently our Rwandan colleagues told her it will rain. Yes, that was on Monday, right? But there was no rain the whole week. But tonight there is indeed rain, and it's quite a lot of rain. Now the anecdote, and this is a funny thing for me, I used to work in Uganda for a couple of years with the Bank of Uganda, and you know, it was interesting. It was raining quite often, but I never could tell. But when I asked any Ugandan, they would look into the sky, and the sky would look always the same. And they would say, no, it's not raining. Or he or she would say, it's going to rain. And an hour later, it would be raining. Or it wouldn't rain. So I wonder what that capacity is to foresee that the rain would come, but apparently you are very well advised to stay indoors, and we are looking forward to the award night. Now this Kigali meeting came, of course, with a couple of very good results. We had the Kigali statement. The reason why I forgot to appreciate Governor's gala dinner last night was simply because I was so taken by the Maya commitments that we saw in the morning that we indeed made it to cross the threshold of the 70 that I forgot. And I think this is really a big success that we got 71 with Uzbekistan, the last country for now to join us. This is really great. I think we also have formulated a couple of priorities around youth financial inclusion, for example. I think that came out very clearly, and I think we will have to find ways to integrate this into our work streams. We also felt there is a need to collect better data, and extensive diagnostics need to be done to better understand the financial needs and the behavior of the youth segment. So I think that has been made very clear during the forum. There is one outcome, and I'm switching now to this device here because things are popping in at this very moment. I think participants also voiced the consensus, 70% of the participants, that a globally coordinated regulatory framework is required for regulating virtual assets, and that AFI can play a key role in building regulators' capacity to understand the policy and the implications of distributed ledger technologies which hold promise for financial inclusion in the areas we are interested in, cross-border, social payments, and so forth. So this is an interesting vote by the members I wanted to share with you. And I think we also saw AFI's first ever FinTech showcase with 10 leading global innovators presenting their innovations, and tonight at the awards dinner we will know who the winners are. A couple of topics. ECAPI, I think it was very clear that ECAPI's members wanted to reaffirm their commitment for regional topics to focus on DFS, market conduct, regulation, and supervision. At the Asian Roundtable, there was a strong focus on measurement and evaluations of the digital and financial literacy programs. We're going to see a few activities there. And there was also a key conclusion from that roundtable I wanted to share with you, and that was that an ecosystem approach can enhance digital literacy programs in countries, and with focus on partnerships between private, public sector, and various stakeholders involved in the ecosystem. That can help to engage, empower, and build effective financial literacy programs for individuals and MSMEs. So that was a conclusion, to go for an ecosystem approach at that roundtable. Pacific Island, you're aware that we launched regulatory sandbox for the region and the implementation of the same. The working groups appointed new leadership and the endorsement of several knowledge products, and we are happy to report that we received interest for hosting working group meetings in 2020 from the Reserve Bank of Vanuatu, from the Central Bank of El Salvador, and from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. And we had a discussion around inclusive green finance, which I think made very clear that there is concern. There's a time horizon, and apparently we also have choices to address these issues. Gender and inclusive finance. I think many of us are concerned that the gender gap is so stubborn, and it continues to be an important topic because the countries are really losing out the economic opportunities as long as we don't tap into this potential of women. On the FDP, I think we got a very good panel here, and I think it's a very relevant topic. And I just want to share with you one view, which is even a little bit political, but I want to share with you. In some of the European countries, you know that there is a certain position towards the refugees. I mean, you realize that even in my own country. And there are sometimes people who are reluctant or afraid, but they have never seen a refugee with their own eyes in their life, no? But it's there, no? But then we have countries like Jordan, where you have 9 million Jordanians and 1 million refugees. And I haven't heard a complaint. I think that's an interesting issue. And I even note that, for example, in Jordan, the teachers, they are going through night shifts to teach the kids of the refugees. And as I said, I don't hear many complaints. So that's an interesting thing. And I think it speaks also for the commitment that we have in the network. I really like that. I would emphasize that this has been a very successful forum. And every forum is different, Governor. No? This forum was cozy. No? It was warm. It was personal. It was relaxed. I think you managed really to get the personal touch, the look and feel that really supports what we want to do in the community. I think that I want to highlight that. And we go away with a very good feeling. And of course, I know you're waiting for this video and the gong that we are going to ring, and then we go and see where we go next. But I think, yeah, the bar kind of was risen again, and we're very happy that you took the responsibility and all the efforts to make that happen. So this brings me to my thanks, and of course I'm very grateful to the National Bank of Rwanda, to the governor, to the DG, to Monique, who brought the gong from Sochi back to Kigali. And I remember when she walked up, to the stage, it was another very moving moment when you will remember, some of you, when she had this thing in her hand and she said, well, we wanted to have this thing for a long time and finally we got it. Remember? Now you got it. And the good thing is you can now hand it over and you can be very pleased of what you have seen. Right. Let me really thank the BNR team, Françoise, Grace, Doreen, Lisa, Bob, Vanessa, Rita, Kevin, Moise, James, and so many others who have worked with us, And what I liked with this team, when we met on Sunday, I saw a team that was kind of very serious, and a bit tense. But then during the week, the smile became more and more obvious, and I think now we are all smiling, and I think we have seen a very good GPF because of your wonderful work. There was an AV team down at the back of Alpha and Digitech Studios with Alfred, and photographers, videographers, sound engineers, the KCC team, Sabrina and Emmanuel, Bruno from Rwanda Events, who also facilitated the ushers, drivers and the logistic support, the transfer team, the translators, speakers, moderators, and last but not least also our MC, Mrs. Barbara Umu Hosa, who we also thank very much. Of course, there's also an AFI team, which is led by Norbert, with an implementation responsibility from Eliki and all the rest of the team. We will see all of them later. So thank you very much also to my team. Who actually start working, okay, we have a flexi day maybe on Tuesday, start working on Wednesday on the next GPF, so that's what's going to be. Now, I would like to thank the board members for their support throughout the week and their presence, all the members who are here, who have made the effort, and we know it's a full week. We hope you can take home what you expected to take home. The partners, which are the funding partners, the private sector partners, our intellectual partners, institutional partners, and last but not least, our development partners. Yeah, Governor John, thank you very much. DG Lobner, thank you very much for all your support throughout the week. Thank you all. And yeah, I see you soon. And where I see you, we will see now. Thank you so much.
Indeed, I'm very happy to say to you that you are very welcome in Jordan. We're very happy in Jordan to receive you. We're honored. It's in fact a good opportunity for everybody to participate in Jordan in this event. This event is very important to us in Jordan. We are, since the beginning, very involved in the question of financial inclusion. Therefore, the next meeting of the Global Forum in 2020 is going to be held in our country. And we hope that everybody will join and everybody will enjoy and benefit. The meeting, the discussion, the brainstorming, the ideas, the interaction, and I hope the fun, the joy in our beautiful country. Again, I encourage you all to come and join us in Jordan in 2020. Thank you very much in advance, and I'm looking forward to see you.
With that said and done, I would like to invite the representative from the Central Bank of Jordan to come forward.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, I'm speechless. First of all, I'd like to thank our host, Your Excellency, Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda. Thank you, Executive Chairman, Ms. Lubna. Thank you, Mr. Alfred. And actually, I'd like to point out that it was a really special, actually, GPF. And I'd like to say that I learned a lot from this GPF. We had the chance in the first day when we arrived to take, a small trip around, beginning from the memorial and downtown to the economic center as well, and looking at the journey that Rwanda has taken since mid-90s until now is very, very insightful, and I think it's a lesson for everyone inside this room. I'd like to thank you and Ms. Lubna for this GPF and all the previous GPFs, which raised the bar and make my life more challenging next year, in order to meet and host all of you. And I think it's a manifestation of our commitments towards financial inclusion. I wouldn't say it's the beginning. I think it's a long journey, and looking forward to serve our people actually in Jordan, particularly vulnerable groups. And as you mentioned, Mr. Alfred, FTPs is one of our main targets that we serve dearly, youth as well, women and everyone. And I remember actually I was having a talk with a friend 2 years ago regarding hosting GPF, and we said, we can wait for 2 more years. I mean, we launched our strategy in 2017, and we thought in 2020, we promised ourselves actually in 2020 to have the GPF in Jordan in order to implement the strategy and look forward. And please take this as a personal invitation to everybody in this room to come to Jordan and enjoy and make us happy by your presence, and looking forward to see everyone in Jordan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the representative to take a seat at the stage. With that said and done, I'm inviting the Honorable John Gwangonga to move towards the gong as we are concluding this ceremony. He will officially close our meeting with ringing the gong. And thereafter, he will hand the pavo to the new host. I'd like to invite Dr. Alfred to give us a few remarks.
We heard it's over again. Not more to say. I just would like to ask the National Bank of Rwanda organizing team to the stage, please. Yeah. If you don't remember whether you're in the team, I can read the names again. I have them there. So. Please. Thank you very much. And of course, one important person is missing. Thank you. And of course, I would also like to invite the AFI team to the stage. I was told it will be a bit full, but we should see who was here and helped us. Thank you.
فجأة لقيتها وكنت فاكرها عروسة البحر خارجة من المية وطلتها أقوى من السحر لما شفتها قلبي دق 3 دقات والطبلة دخلت لعبت جوا دماغي حاجات لما الرق دخل قلبي رق وحنيت طب هعمل ايه رحت انا غنيت امتى الحب طال قلبي ولا في الخيال عودك ده فيه يتقال موال ويا عيني يا سيدي على الايام لما تهادي قلوبنا غرام فجأة يهون كل اللي ولقيت جوايا خناقة كبيرة قامت على طول عقلي يعقلني وقلبي يقول لي روح لا اقول ما خدتش ثواني وكان قلبي طالع كسبان رحت وقلت لها ان انا والهان امتى الحب طال قلبي ولا في الخيال حبك ده فيه يتقال موال ويا عيني يا سيدي على الايام لما تهادي قلوبنا غرام فجأة يهون كل اللي
Round of applause one more time for the both teams and the exceptional work done. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2019 Global Policy Forum has successfully been concluded. It has been my great pleasure to facilitate this meeting. Thank you.